Welcome to Muskegon Rising, a community service project of the Muskegon Rotary Club. Our purpose is to create lasting positive change. We've been doing that here since 1916. So, let's get started.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Muskegon Rotary. DJ Hilson here, your host. It is an honor and a privilege to have as my guest today John Rooks, who is a developer who's done a lot of major developments here in Muskegon. And we're going to spend some time certainly talking about that, amongst other things. So thanks for tuning in to both the audio and video portion of this podcast. And as always, thanks to Muskegon Rotary for allowing this to happen. And many thanks to the brains behind this operation, Mike Vogus, for turning a vision into reality. So, John, welcome. It's great to have you here today. Why don't we start out by telling a little bit about kind of yourself, sort of your biography, if you will, how you got to where you are today.
Well, thanks, DJ. I'll try to be brief.
Go ahead. Take as long as you want.
So I live here in Muskegon County in Norton Shores, and I have since 2001. But I didn't really start working here until 2008 when I bought the old Hackley Bank building, which is now known as High Point Flats. But I started real estate development 35 years ago. I was right out of college, and my background is really that I grew up in Grand Rapids, and my grandfather was a preacher. My other grandfather was the founding dean of Calvin College, and all my uncles were professors, and my dad was a photographer. So we had no business background in our family. And from their perspective, I had no business getting into business. But eventually, by the time I was 15, I really wanted to learn more. And I was able to convince a Boy Scout master to be an investor and help me buy two dilapidated houses. One was condemned and the other one should have been. And we fixed them up and resold them when I was 16. And it sort of launched this interest in real estate throughout my high school years and then during college. The only year I didn't work on real estate, the years I didn't work on real estate is when I lived in Ann Arbor at the Ross School of Business, and then a little stint overseas. But I came back to Muskegon County, very excited to do real estate development, and I put together the package and the funding to buy property in Montague at the north end of Muskegon County. So it's interesting because I did that project in my 20s, between age 25 and 30, and then I diverted to other communities, 8 other communities in West Michigan, and sort of avoided Muskegon itself because I had done really good things in White Lake, 3 marinas, and a myriad of condo and housing developments in northern Muskegon County, but then I found myself in Spring Lake and Grand Haven and Grand Rapids, and developed about 60% of the condos in downtown Grand Rapids. And it wasn't until 2008 when a current member of this community, who was at the time, they called him Downtown Dan Ritzma, reached out and convinced me to take a look at a building in Muskegon in 2008. Right around when we were entering the recession, and it was a good deal. I was excited about the prospect for its development, and so I made a leap into Muskegon, and it was largely because the paper mill had closed down, and it didn't smell bad here, and the mall was gone, and it seemed like there was a lot of opportunity downtown with a blank slate. So I loved the opportunity. I leaped at it, actually. And then in 2009, actually went further with the investing idea in Muskegon and acquired the Shoreline Inn and the Lake House and the Terrace Point Marina. That was a turnaround project. It was very troubled. It needed attention and was about to go dark. We saved it one day before it went dark, and the employees got to stay. And then from that point forward, it kept getting better and better. And that whole peninsula actually became a success story because Hinman Building also was empty, and that company turned around that building simultaneously while I was working on the shoreline. We were talking and trying to make sure that we both succeeded together And that whole peninsula became a success story in 2009, 10, and 11 when a lot of places were still struggling through the recession. And then move a little forward, and we bought the Mitchell Linda Beach Lodge. We turned that around after it had the big fire. And then the Delta by Marriott, which was the former Holiday Inn, we bought that in 2013. And then in 2016, 17, we started working hard with the city and the county on a joint venture, sort of a public-private partnership to figure out a way to bring a convention center to town. And then by 2019, we were under construction on a convention center, and simultaneously, we were doing this renovation, this major renovation, basically a full gut and rebuild of the old Holiday Inn and turned it into the Delta by Marriott. And then it became a campus where the arena, with the city's leadership, was able to be redeveloped into a modern arena with all the necessary improvements so that everything could be under one roof with the convention center, the arena, the Delta by Marriott, and now a couple restaurants in the arena, and then everything that's now across the street and behind it, and all this redevelopment that's happened. Downtown is just amazing. We're just happy to be part of it and hope that we can continue to watch Muskegon grow and go, as they say. It's been a great experience to be here. The city has been supportive, the county's supportive, the building department's supportive. It's a business-friendly community. We're just a cog in the wheel, and we're just happy to be part of it.
Well, it's amazing just to listen to you list all those. It starts as a small development now, and then you gravitate to larger and larger and larger projects. And one of the questions, and you kind of touched on it, but I want you to expand on this a little bit more. I mean, obviously, and I know nothing, I'll just confess ignorance here. I know nothing about real estate development, but I'm fascinated by it because I'm sure it's a risk-reward type industry, right? I mean, sometimes, the greater the risk could be the greater reward, or you're taking a leap of faith. At least that's kind of my perception of it. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But how important are those relationships? You mentioned certainly coming in at sort of at the right time. You had good relationship with the city, obviously with the convention center that involved the county as well. How important are developing and then maintaining those relationships for the work that you do?
Well, they're very important because good relationships makes your job more fun, and I think you do better at work if you enjoy your job. So we enjoy all these relationships, and it's important for us to feel like it's a project that just isn't there to make money, but it's good for the people that work for us, but it's good for the community, and we call them impact investments. And frankly, when I started, right out of the gates, I could feel it, what it was like to build a project that could change a community like we did in Montague, where we became the biggest taxpayer in the city of Montague, and it had a huge economic impact on the downtown shop owners and all the different businesses that were near the project. But since then, some of the Grand Rapids projects were in neighborhoods where there was, you're based on your job, you know what I'm talking about, but we bought a building, it's an old school. And the first phone call the next day after we bought this old school was, can we set up camp? The police called and they wanted to set up camp and set up a sting operation for the crack houses across the street. But it had a huge impact positively on the neighborhood. And if you've been downtown in West Grand Rapids, we call it the West Side, you'll see Bridge Street. It's just thriving. But we were ahead of the curve then. We feel like when we came to Muskegon in 2008, 2009, we were significantly ahead of the curve. We still think that if someone comes as a developer to Muskegon today, they're still ahead of the curve because Muskegon has such incredible potential that they're going to, back to your original question, benefit from these relationships because the city is aggressively seeking developments and will bend over backwards to help developers do good projects. And there's a demand for homes, there's a demand for apartments, there's a demand across the board at all price points. And that's one of the things we're trying to do next, is to build projects that support that need.
Yeah. So, obviously, I'm sure there's a lot of research that goes into if you're going to make an investment or develop a certain area. I want to use housing as an example. Is it, and maybe it's not, is it surprising to you to see sort of the demand for housing here in Muskegon itself? Or as I believe, I've always believed that Muskegon is sort of a diamond in the rough, because I'm not originally from Muskegon. I moved here when I took this job in 1999 and have always really appreciated the potential. And it's guys like you that are seeing that as well. Because I always believe, hey, all we need is a couple of businesses or developers to take a chance and make an investment, which you've done. And we're going to see this community just skyrocket. So what is it that you look at when you're looking at a project as far as whether or not you think it's going to make that impact that you're hoping it'll make?
Well, it depends on when we were doing those analysis of impact. So, for example, when we started High Point Flats, there was nothing but subsidized housing in downtown Muskegon, and definitely at that point, I'll agree with you, it was a diamond in the rough. There was a big risk for us because we were building something that hadn't been done before, where we had to be unsupported with subsidized rents, and we had to find customers that could pay market rate rents. We did an experiment. The experiment worked. We were full quickly, and it laid the groundwork for basically other developers to get appraisers to buy into the idea that their projects were worth what they were worth when they were going to be complete, and lenders would lend, and it would start sort of a little bit of a market rate housing boom for apartments. Simultaneously, we had looked at that vacant land that was basically wasteland. It had been contaminated badly by the old Teledyne company, and it was next door to the Shoreline Inn, and it was available and ripe for development. We tried to sell it, but eventually people were afraid of the Muskegon market. So we thought, why don't we try to build some for-sale housing instead of for-rent housing? And it would be the first real estate development in the city of Muskegon in 20 years. And someone told me, and I'm not sure it's accurate, but someone said that there was only 3 homes built in 20 years in Muskegon, and that was because of fires. And then we built 70 homes at Terrace Point Landing. They all sold out. It started slow. We only sold 3 in the first year. But then the next year, I sold dozens. And then in the third and in the fourth year, we sold out immediately. So it was a really cool feeling to bring for-sale housing to town. And now there's a lot of for-sale housing projects in the works. Fast forward to today, which is 4 or 5 years later, there's a much bigger housing need, because now, even though there's not a huge population growth, although we do have that, the statistics are that 1/3 of people in Muskegon County live alone, 1/3 lives with one or other person, and 1/3 lives with more than 2 people. So there's a big need for housing, and it's across all price points, but the primary missing price point is what we're trying to attack with Shaw Walker redevelopment, with the 580 unit development there in this 100-year-old factory that is dilapidated, has 8,400 broken windows. It's right on the water, basically across the street from the municipal marina and the fairgrounds. It's an eyesore. It's been abandoned since 1989, but we can convert that to a solution. And to recycle this building is the best decision. It's a beautiful building with a lot of history. Everybody had an uncle or an aunt or a sister or brother that worked there. It had over 1,000 employees. It's a strong concrete structure, not just with the horizontal, but all the vertical and the horizontal components are concrete, very, very sturdy, and it needs to be saved. But it can attack a missing middle, they call it. It's an attainable housing segment where the people that will live there, many of them can't qualify for affordable housing because they make just a little bit too much money. They might make $60,000 or $70,000, but they also have a truck payment. Maybe they have a child support payment. Maybe they have children, part-time children. And as a result, they're not able to find a decent place to live in this community, because the leftover money after those other expenses leaves them with maybe $1,000. And that $1,000 a month is something that we can provide a really cool place to live with a lifestyle that is unparalleled, because you're next to Muskegon Lake. You have a rooftop pool, you have 2 clubhouses, you've got a fitness center, there's a daycare center, there's a dog care center, there's a massage therapy area, there's a hair salon, and there's a restaurant and a bar, all under the same roof, along with your 579 neighbors that become your friends. And so we think we can offer a really diverse place to live with, the price point I described, which is attainable, but also we'll have some luxury condos for sale that'll be in the $300,000 to $750,000 range. Not a lot of them, but maybe 10% of the units will be represented by that.
So I know that part of I'll say your mission, and mission might not be the right word, but when you're dealing with these buildings that you're restoring, essentially not starting from scratch, you're trying to take the bones and turn it into something. How important is it to try to save a piece of that, so that there is I guess I'll call it a landmark or two of that building that you're restoring as part of whatever that new development is going to be?
Well, when something's known as the largest furniture factory in the world, it seems pretty important to me, because West Michigan was known for its furniture. Yep. And its history was that it was called Furniture City in Grand Rapids, and yet it was all over West Michigan. And my dad was a photographer for Steelcase, so I like it for that reason. But I also like it just because it's an iconic structure. So I think it's important to save some history, keep these old buildings. We did the same thing in Grand Rapids at the Boardwalk. It was the Berkey and Gay Furniture Factory, which was the preceding largest furniture factory in the world, ironically. And then there was another one down the street where the Ammerman building is. But that's very important to me, because it's something that will last longer than a lot of the new buildings that are built today, because the columns are this wide instead of this big, and the ceiling heights are 14 feet instead of 8 feet, and the thickness of the floors are triple the thickness of normal floors, and you can jump up and down above the floor and you can't hear anything below it. It's just a perfect building that's ripe for residential development, and the state likes it. It's a recycling event. It's green. We're going to put solar on top of it, most likely. It's got a huge field of roof that we can use for solar. We're just super excited about the whole concept. And it'll be very dog friendly. We'll have a lot of units on the first floor that will have their own private dog yards, and then we'll have dog runs. We'll have pickleball courts outside. It should just be a really fun place to live with more amenities than, frankly, any project in West Michigan, because right now the Boardwalk in Grand Rapids that we did has the most amenities. This one's going to have more.
Well, see, I like hearing that. I like hearing that we can one-up Grand Rapids, even though I know you stick your feet in all these pools, and so I'm not going to stick you to that. But as a resident of Muskegon who likes to see Muskegon first, I appreciate that very much. I've seen renditions of what your vision, what it's going to look like, and the chimney remains.
Yeah, we want to tell the whole story about the keeping some of those old components. And we've actually gone to the library, we've gone to the museum, we've gone to any source we can that has old photos of the building. We want to reuse some of the windows and make light boxes out of them, or put mirrors in the old window frames and hang them on the wall, and use them for decoration. And we want to keep the smokestack, tell the old story, the story of the old building, and keep the memory going. And we want to incorporate into the name the history of the building as well, whether we call it SW Flats or SW Lofts, or we might call it Shaw. We don't know what we're going to call it yet, but we're going to keep the name in the history so that nobody will ever forget what that used to be. Just like we did at Union Square, we have an old school. We kept all the slate chalkboards, put them in the units. We kept all the old lockers, and that was your entry closet. we kept all the old cases and all the old trophies and put them in the cases.
That's awesome. So what, if you can talk about it, what's the timeline, do you think, in order to start? I know there's been a lot happening behind the scenes that maybe nobody really knows about, but, what do you expect that timeline to be?
Yeah, so the project's moving fast in the sense that we just bought it a little over a year ago. And in that time frame, we've worked with the state and received a big incentive package that was complex, but we received an incentive package to get us started. And we've done over $1 million of work in soft costs so far and some hard costs, meaning that we've done environmental research, we've done environmental studies, we've studied every possible corner of that building, we've scanned it, we have it on a computer, it tells us where every column is. We know where the asbestos is that needs to be removed. We know where the lead paint is that needs to be removed. We've got a plan for everything environmental, but we're about 60 to 70% of the way through the architectural drawings. We meet every week for 5 hours with the architecture firm and answer all their questions. And the timeline is to be out to bid by the end of May, and then start with some of the selective demo at the late summer months. And then we'll be hopefully finalizing all our bids at the same time, and then we can get started on construction this fall. So it is a fast timeline. The first phase will include 342 units, but we're also including in the first phase the entire shell completion. Okay. In other words, not just the first phase of windows and roof, but the second phase of windows and roof, plus the first phase of windows and roof, plus the interior of the first phase and all the amenities. And then we've got about 20,000 square feet of supporting retail that I described earlier. Mm-hmm. And we need to find tenants that we're going to be selective and try to find the tenant that provides the biggest impact for the community and the people that live there to create the best lifestyle.
That sounds fantastic. It sounds like a great place for, a guy that might be retiring in the next 15 years to think about before, as a place to call home.
All walks of life, the young professional to my best example is in Grand Rapids at the City View building, a 13-story building. There was a philanthropist that has his name on one of the buildings in Grand Rapids. He lived next door to a 28-year-old guy that was starting his own company that could barely put two nickels together, but had enough money for rent in a small unit next door. I constantly ran into those guys out in the city at restaurants on Thursday nights, and I just thought it was fascinating that a 75-year-old and a 28-year-old would develop a friendship. And it just goes to show people don't like to be pigeonholed into a category of living like they used to when my grandpa looked for his retirement home.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So, along with development of already historical buildings into, I'll say repurposing, you also, it's a big deal for you to make sure that that your projects are a catalyst for community. I like, those phrases, because again, it's showing that upstart, that jumpstart. What is it? I guess what was it? You've kind of described it a little bit, but what was it about Muskegon that you saw that you had an opportunity to be a catalyst for this community?
Well, first of all, it was ignored for so many years, which it's a blessing in disguise in a way, because it creates an opportunity for a developer like me. Because people sidestepped Muskegon like I did because of the paper mill and the smells that it created, because of the layout of the downtown, because of the big shopping mall that kind of made downtown difficult to consider development in. And it was ideal because those two things sort of disappeared in the same decade. And then from our perspective, the idea of coming into downtown and making this impact in the housing market, both for sale and for rent, and then simultaneously buy the two hotels that were struggling. One was about to lose its flag. That was the old Holiday Inn. and then the other one was about to go dark because of the foreclosure.
Mm-hmm.
So by buying both of those hotels and turning them into 50 to 55% occupancy rates makes them viable. It doesn't make them hyper successful.
Mm-hmm.
Grand Rapids hotels are all at 70 to 75% occupancy rates. So we have a goal to get there. And one of the reasons we were pushing for the convention center was to get to that goal. But maybe you've seen it in the news recently. We teamed up with the Amway Hotel Corporation in Grand Rapids that we're all familiar with,
Mm-hmm.
and we happen to be friends with. And that company is going to, in our opinion, take it to the next level by taking our off season and making it busier, because they can dovetail some of their experience by being the biggest West Michigan hotel operator and biggest in Grand Rapids, of course, because they operate the Amway Grand, the JW Marriott, the Hyatt, and the list goes on. All the nicest high-end hotels are the ones they operate, and they can come into our hotels now as the property manager. We didn't sell anything. We just hired them under a property management agreement.
Gotcha.
To help push occupancy and have less darkness in the convention center. And it's sad to us that 48% of the time our hotel rooms are empty. We want them to make that better. And yet we've taken these hotels from 20% occupancy and 35% occupancy respectively for the two hotels, and now they're up to 50 to 52%. And so we can focus on the Shaw Walker project. Rory and I, my right-hand man, he and I will be able to focus more on the Shaw Walker project and also on this paper mill property that we have under contract that we hope to develop soon, which is 123 acres and 1.5 miles frontage on Muskegon Lake, which is the biggest lake, as we know, connected to Lake Michigan. So we're super excited to do both projects in tandem, but we felt like the best way to do that would be to make this this arrangement with the AHC company.
That makes perfect sense, and certainly, I'm as we get into conversation about what's next. Obviously, Shaw Walker is the immediate next because that is on a quick timeline, and the what I'll call the old paper mill property. I know, at least for a while, there have been renditions of what that might look like, and maybe that was somebody else's vision. I mean, can you share with us kind of your vision of what that might look like, and how that might help move Muskegon even further than it already is?
Well, it also addresses the county-wide need for housing. There's 9,000 units needed in this county, along with the subcomponent of the city, which is 30, I think, almost 3,000 or 3,800, maybe I'm almost 4,000, so like 3,800 units in the city of Muskegon. So these housing unit need reports are one source of our research, but we also hire another firm that's independent and separate from the city firm, and they study the housing needs for us. And then we have our own experience based on how we sold houses at Terrace Point, or we rented units at High Point Flats, and we study our market rates and what we can sell things for. And SAPI just fits into what we do because we've done a lot of housing developments on vacant land like Terrace Point, but we've done them in Spring Lake. We did a big project called Bayou Meadows in Spring Lake, and I've done other housing developments on vacant land. But SAPI fits in our criteria because it involves apartments, which we do, single-family housing, small condominiums, and small condominium buildings, larger condominium buildings, and then townhouses, and then a marina, plus an in-out service like we have in Grand Haven called The Wharf, where we operate the Wharf Marina, the biggest in-out service in Grand Haven. So we'd like to do the same thing here, but the part that we haven't done in the past is senior housing, but we'll bring someone in to help us do that and be, in that sense, more of a master developer.
Yeah.
But there's a demand across all price points again, where we can have some small studio units that are still in that attainable price point, even though they're on the water. We can have some non-waterfront 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms that are also attainable. They might not be staring right at Muskegon Lake, but that's a big piece of property, so there's waterfront and non-waterfront space. Then there's a retail corridor that has over 40 to 45 shops that will lead right into the development, that will be sort of a connector to the waterfront. And then there's, I think, 18 public park areas that we're donating. And then there's a section that the city has an option to buy. So these different public park access points are going to be perfect for people that want to launch kayaks, people that like to fish, people that like to just be by the water, picnic, and those various parks and boardwalks are going to be fully open to the public, not to mention, and I think it's 1,000 feet of frontage and, if I'm not mistaken, 6 acres of land. So it's significant, but we think there's a big demand. Like, one of the first parts in the project would be lots like we have at Terrace Point Landing, where somebody bought a lot and built a house at Terrace Point Landing, and they had $450,000 into it. They just sold it for $850,000 a few years after they bought it. So it was a great investment, and you kind of understand it because Muskegon's still so undervalued. That's why I still think we're ahead of the curve, because that same size lot that we're going to sell at Sappi is $900,000 in Spring Lake. It's over $1 million in Saugatuck, and it's somewhere in between in Holland on Lake Makatawa. Mm-hmm. And we will be bringing those units to market at the $250,000 to $300,000 range. That's the lot. And then you build your house on it, and you have something that is, in my opinion, 10 years from now going to be similar in value to those other markets. And yet you're getting this huge early discount because we're going to have 220 waterfront lots. So in order to have velocity, we're going to have to sell them below market so we can make this project sell fast.
That's phenomenal. I can't even imagine kind of what goes through your head on a daily basis as you're trying to juggle all these different projects and yet, continue to keep sort of that visionary aspect of it all. I assume that you're always kind of looking at what the next potential development might be, whether it's a building or a piece of property. It just must be, as you kind of drive through, thinking, man, I could do something here. I could do something there. Is that kind of how it is? I mean,
well, it's often a situation where people reach out to us, or a community reaches out to us,
okay,
or a development director has an idea, or maybe we have an idea, or an employee has an idea, and it's a consolidation of lots of people's ideas, and it seems to work out. And we were, for a while, trying to avoid doing Shaw because it had been for sale for a long time.
Yeah.
But the brokers kept calling, and the price kept getting more attractive, and there was some leaders in this community that really encouraged us, and we just decided to go for it and got it more and more excited about it when we saw the building, but tried to kind of stay away for a little bit because we had enough going on. And the timing just worked, so we ended up buying it, a little over a year ago. And then as far as Sappi goes, when you do a project like Shaw, you start thinking of synergies with other projects, and those two projects really interact well together. And if we're gonna staff up and seek talent to do the Shaw project, and we now have relationships that we didn't have with some of the architecture firms and some of the different support firms that we need to do a project like that. It just makes sense to do those projects at the same time. And the synergy of selling them and filling them, and not necessarily selling, but renting and selling, and someone that will look at Shaw to rent might be a buyer in disguise for Sappi, and someone that looks at Sappi might be a buyer in disguise for Shaw. And there will be the same effect that we had in Grand Rapids when we did the two largest condominium projects in Grand Rapids at the time. And everybody thought we were crazy because we started Union Square, and shortly after that started Boardwalk. And together they were so huge, but they really fed into each other, and they elevated the attention of those two projects to Grand Rapids, where they actually helped each other sell.
Yeah, it's amazing. I want to finish with talking a little bit about Parkland Properties. How many people are under the umbrella or employed by Parkland Properties?
It's around 250 year-round, but then, of course, we blow up to over 300 people in the summers because of the seasonality. We have 3 restaurants and the 2 hotels that generate the growth of needing more employees in the summertime. So there's a lot of opportunity at Parkland this coming summer. AHC has a great program for employees and attraction and retention. So that's
so if people are listening to this and they're interested in being a part of either the full year help or maybe just a job in the summer, where should they go?
They would reach out to that's a great question for Rory, who I see in the distance. What's the best way for it would be Mary Beth at Parkland Properties.
Okay.
And she's our HR director, and she operates out of the Shoreline Inn. And you can stop in and fill out an application, and suffice it to say, Mary Beth will do her best at recruiting you. And,
I bet.
And after that, the whole team will do our best at retaining you.
Perfect. Now, if memory serves me correctly, you can correct me if I'm wrong, your office, is it the old fire station still?
Yeah, we're right across the street from City Hall, and we bought that in 2013 as well. Once we knew we were buying the Holiday Inn, we decided to switch our headquarters from Grand Rapids to Muskegon, and so we've been here for 10 years as our headquarters, and we're proud to be here, and we love being on the lakeshore.
What does it still have the fire poles inside?
So we had to disconnect those for code reasons.
Gotcha.
The fire, but I put one in my office and made a table out of it.
That's awesome.
Pretty fun.
That's awesome. Well, John, look, I tell you what, I'm so glad that we were able to accomplish this interview. It's amazing to me, and I really appreciate sort of your vision, your foresight, and taking a risk and making this community great. As a person who has, been a consumer at a lot of these places that you have developed, you've done a fantastic job. I obviously was always proud to be a Muskegon resident, but I tell you what, I love puffing my chest these days, especially with my colleagues from across the state, and basically saying, you may have thought that Muskegon was an armpit, but you got to see us. You got to check us out now because it is fantastic.
We have lakes, we have parks, we have sand dunes, we've got culture to no end with the art museum and the Frauenthal Theater. Those are the things that also attracted me, is just knowing we had all this water, this beach, the Michigan Adventure, the Muskegon State Park with the zip lines and the illuminated cross-country ski trails in the winter and ice skating trails. It's just, there's such a variety pack of attractions, whether it's culture or sport or just recreation. It's amazing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Well, thanks again. Thank you for everything you've done for this community. Really appreciate it. And thank you for taking the time out of, I know, a very busy schedule to spend some time with us. Thank you.
I enjoyed it. And thank you so much for all the good questions. And doing these podcasts is pretty cool because I think there's a lot of education needed for what Muskegon has to offer.
I agree 100%. Well, Rotarians and Muskegonites, this ends our episode with John Rooks and Parkland Properties. Appreciate you continuing to listen, and make sure when this hits social media that you share it with your friends and your neighbors so they can learn more about how great Muskegon is. Thank you, Muskegon Rotary, for making this happen. As always, Mike Vogus, thank you for this.